Have you ever given 6 years of 80-hour work weeks to build an empire, only to watch an arrogant Nepo baby steal your promotion and humiliate you? I have, but I did not cry, and I certainly did not get mad. Listen to me closely. Sometimes the most flawless revenge requires zero effort. You just step back, cross your arms, and watch the idiots burn down the $50 million kingdom they stole from you. Hello, listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you so sincerely for tuning in today and for being such a wonderful community. Unfortunately, YouTube recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us completely without a budget to keep our operations running. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can cover their living expenses and continue creating these incredible stories for you. You can support us easily by scanning the QR code right on your screen, or by clicking the donation link located in the video description or the pinned comment below. Now, let me introduce myself. My name is Cora Nelson. I am 32 years old, and this is the story of how a single boardroom meeting changed my life and destroyed a corrupt empire. The air inside the executive boardroom of Aethirus Property Group was always kept freezing cold. They said it kept the executives alert, but I always felt it was just to remind the rest of us how sterile and unforgiving the corporate world truly was. I was standing at the head of a massive mahogany table, the bright light of the projector casting a soft blue glow across my face. On the screen behind me was the final risk assessment for the Orion Heights. This was not just a building, it was a flagship megaproject, a towering symbol of wealth that would redefine the city skyline. For the past 6 years, I had poured my absolute soul into this company. I worked 80 hours a week, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and any semblance of a personal life. I practically lived in my office, swimming through oceans of zoning laws, compliance forms, and ecological impact studies. The Orion Heights was my baby. I knew every structural flaw, every permit deadline, and every legal loophole that could potentially sink a $50 million investment. Sitting directly across from me, slouching in a custom leather chair, was Julian Vance. Julian was the newly minted vice president of operations. He did not earn that title through late nights or brilliant strategy. He earned it because his family name opened doors that my 6 years of blood, sweat, and tears could never even unlock. He was a textbook nepotism baby, armed with an expensive haircut and a superiority complex. I was right in the middle of explaining the most critical chart of the entire presentation. I was detailing the environmental compliance timeline, a crucial step we needed to secure state funding. I took a deep breath to emphasize the next point, but I never got to make it. Julian abruptly held up his hand. He let out a loud, theatrical sigh that echoed across the silent room. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood, and flashed a condescending, half-mocking smirk. "I am going to stop you right there," Julian interrupted, his voice dripping with an arrogance that made my skin crawl. "You are a very hard-working worker bee, Cora, truly. We all appreciate your little spreadsheets. But let us be brutally honest here. You do not have the traits to be management material. This project requires bold leadership and expansive vision, not a glorified paper counter." The entire room went dead silent, the kind of silence where you could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit working overtime. I looked around the table. There were 12 senior board members present. Not a single one of them made eye contact with me. They stared at their notepads, their expensive watches, or the carpet. I saw flashes of pity in their eyes. But pity does not pay the bills, and it certainly does not offer promotions. But Julian was not finished twisting the knife. He stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket, and gestured toward the back of the room. "Therefore," Julian announced proudly, "I am officially naming Bryce as the new project director for the Orion Heights. He has the pedigree and the alpha mindset this development desperately needs." Bryce. He actually gave the project to Bryce. Bryce was Julian's fraternity brother from their university days, a man so staggeringly incompetent that just last month, he handed me a wrinkled receipt from a coffee shop and asked me where he was supposed to file the building permit. Bryce grinned foolishly from the corner of the room, raising a hand in a clumsy salute. At that exact moment, a strange physiological shift happened inside my body. A lesser person might have cried. Some would have screamed, thrown their papers, or quit on the spot in a fiery blaze of glory. I did none of those things. The burning humiliation I felt just seconds prior instantly crystallized into pure, freezing ice. I looked at Julian, basking in his unearned power, and I looked at Bryce, a buffoon about to be handed the keys to a kingdom I built from the ground up. My 80 hours a week, my late nights, my dedication, it was all a hilarious joke to these elites. I did not frown. I did not glare. Instead, I let a warm, perfectly calm smile spread across my face. "Thank you for your honesty, Julian," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. Without waiting for a response, I smoothly closed my laptop. The projector screen behind me went entirely black. I gathered my neat stack of folders, tucked my computer under my arm, and walked out of the boardroom with my head held high. I closed the heavy oak door softly behind me. As I walked down the long, carpeted hallway, I did not feel defeated. I felt liberated, because at that precise moment, I had already made a silent decision that was going to sweep Julian Vance's entire career completely off the map. I walked straight back to my cubicle, my pulse remarkably steady. I did not pack my belongings in a cardboard box. I did not draft a furious resignation letter. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out my original employment contract from 6 years ago. I placed it flat on my desk, grabbed a neon yellow highlighter, and carefully dragged the bright ink across my official job title, Logistics Coordinator. That was it. I was not the Chief Risk Officer. I was not the legal representative. I was not the project manager. I was just the Logistics Coordinator. For years, I had voluntarily carried the weight of 4 different executive roles because I believed in the grand vision. I believed hard work would eventually be rewarded, but Julian had made the new corporate rules exceedingly clear. I was just a paper counter. So, starting that very second, I decided to count the paper exactly as my contract dictated, not a single page more. The transformation began that afternoon. When the clock on my computer monitor struck exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, I did something I had not done in half a decade. I closed my email client, I powered down my machine, I put on my coat, and walked out the glass doors into the crisp evening air. My phone vibrated in my pocket at 10 minutes past midnight. It was Bryce. He was frantically messaging me about a vendor agreement he had tangled up. In the past, I would have flipped open my laptop in bed, called the vendor, smoothed over the miscommunication, and drafted a revised addendum by 2 in the morning. This time, I read the panicked message as I poured myself a generous glass of red wine. I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb mode, placed it face down on the kitchen counter, and went to sleep. I slept a full 8 hours. It was glorious. The true beauty of malicious compliance is how quiet it is. You do not have to break any rules. You just have to stop going above and beyond to save people from their own stupidity. I stopped being the invisible safety net for the department. When Julian forgot to file the mandatory safety protocol updates for the scaffolding teams, I did not quietly submit them on his behalf. I simply filed my own supply reports and went to lunch. When Bryce inevitably sent the outdated geological survey to the city planning director instead of the finalized bedrock analysis, I did not intercept the email and call the director to apologize and explain the mix-up. I just sat at my desk, sipping my morning coffee, and let the catastrophic error hit the city government inbox. The fallout was immediate. The city flagged the project for review, halting the initial excavation phase. It took exactly 3 weeks for Aetheris Property Group to descend into absolute, spectacular chaos. Without me constantly putting out invisible fires behind the scenes, the foundation of the Orion Heights began to crumble. Bryce was drowning. He had no idea how to manage the complex web of subcontractors. Worse, he tried to mask his incompetence with pure arrogance. Instead of asking for help, he marched down to the construction site and started barking contradictory orders at the union foreman. You do not talk down to seasoned construction crews. By the end of the third week, the heavy machinery operators and the steel workers went on a wildcat strike. They simply parked the bulldozers, turned off the cranes, and walked off the site, demanding Bryce be removed from all site communications. The site was completely dead. Every single day of delay was burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars. Julian was furious. His golden boy was failing publicly, and the senior executives were starting to ask very uncomfortable questions about the massive budget bleed. He summoned me to his corner office. When I walked in, he was pacing back and forth, his tie loosened and his perfectly styled hair looking slightly frantic. He slammed his hands down on his desk, leaning aggressively toward me. "I need you down at the site right now," Julian barked, his face flushed with anger. "The contractors are throwing a tantrum over Bryce. Go down there, smooth things over with the union representatives, fix the geological paperwork with the city, and get those excavators moving by tomorrow morning. This is an absolute disaster." I stood perfectly still. I did not cross my arms or raise my voice. I looked at him with the polite, blank expression of a retail worker dealing with a difficult customer. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Julian," I replied evenly. His eyes widened in shock. "Excuse me, I am giving you a direct order." "And I am respectfully declining," I said, my voice softer and calmer than ever. "Negotiating union disputes and handling city geological compliance are duties assigned exclusively to the project director. My role is logistics coordinator. I coordinate the delivery of office supplies and maintain the archiving system. Going to the site would be a severe overstep of my designated authority." Before he could explode, I turned around and walked back to my desk. Julian immediately followed up his verbal threat with a blistering email, formally demanding I take over the site management or face immediate disciplinary action for insubordination. I had been waiting for this exact moment. I hit reply. I politely attached a digital copy of my original employment contract, with my job description highlighted. I wrote a brief, highly professional message stating that I was strictly adhering to the boundaries of my role to avoid stepping on the new project director's toes, exactly as Julian had advised in the board meeting. Then, right before I clicked send, I added a few extra addresses to the carbon copy line. I copied the Director of Human Resources, the head of corporate legal, and the external compliance auditor. I clicked send. I had effectively trapped him. Any further attempt to force me into managerial duties without a formal promotion and a massive pay raise would trigger a catastrophic labor lawsuit, with Human Resources now watching his every move. Julian was completely neutralized. He was utterly trapped in the burning room he had built for himself, and I was simply standing outside, making sure the door was securely locked. The Orion Heights was no longer just a construction site. It was a massive, gaping wound, hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate. With the union workers on strike and the heavy machinery sitting idle, the project was burning through roughly $80,000 every single day in equipment rental fees and penalty clauses. The silence outside was deafening, but inside the office, the panic was a physical weight. Julian was rapidly losing control. The senior board members were demanding daily updates, and his golden boy, Bryce, was spending his afternoons hiding in his office, aggressively playing golf on his smartphone. Julian needed a miracle, or more accurately, he needed a shiny distraction to prove his worth to the board. So, he decided to implement what he proudly called a revolutionary digital synergy and streamline protocol. In reality, it was a ridiculously cheap, poorly coded data management software he had likely discovered on a late-night tech blog. He wanted to show the executives that he was cutting administrative bloat by fully automating our legal archives. You do not automate complex compliance law. Any entry-level assistant could have told him that, but Julian forced the entire system migration over a single weekend without consulting the information technology department. The new software featured a highly aggressive, automated duplicate clearing algorithm designed to save cloud storage space. It took one digital look at the massive, intricately cross-referenced archive of environmental compliance records I had spent 3 agonizing years building, deemed the overlapping file names redundant, and systematically purged them. It wiped out hundreds of soil samples, bedrock analyses, and water table assessments. The entire directory was gone, evaporated into thin air. It was a digital massacre. The timing of this technological disaster was almost poetic. Exactly 4 days after the archive was permanently deleted, a thick, formal envelope arrived via certified mail. It was from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. The letter was not a polite request. It was a dire warning. The agency threatened to completely revoke the master construction permit for the entire Orion Heights development unless Aetheris Property Group produced the finalized ecological impact report within 48 hours. Without that permit, the project was legally dead. The $50 million state grant would be automatically withdrawn, and the company would face crippling fines. The color completely drained from Julian's face when he read the letter. He was staring down the barrel of a catastrophic financial collapse, and there was no way to hide it from the investors. But a narcissist cornered is a very dangerous creature. Instead of taking responsibility, Julian fell back on his favorite survival tactic. He needed a scapegoat, and he needed one fast. He immediately called for a mandatory emergency summit in the main conference room. He did not just invite our internal team. He brought in the senior managing partners, the lead corporate attorneys, and 2 representatives from our biggest investment firm. He was setting the stage for a very public execution. Mine. I walked into the conference room holding only my tablet. I took a quiet seat in the corner, right next to the main projection unit. Julian stood at the head of the long glass table, wearing a dark custom suit, looking incredibly grave. He cleared his throat and addressed the room with a masterful display of fake sorrow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice thick with rehearsed disappointment, "we are facing a critical compliance breach. The Environmental Protection Agency has issued a 48-hour ultimatum. We are unable to provide the documents because it appears we have a saboteur within our ranks." He paused dramatically, turning his piercing gaze directly at me. The entire room turned to follow his eyes. "We have reason to believe that our logistics coordinator, Cora, has intentionally hidden or deleted the ecological impact reports. We suspect she isolated these crucial files on an encrypted drive out of pure spite for not receiving the project director position. This is an act of corporate treason." The room erupted in shocked whispers. The lead attorney began furiously scribbling on his legal pad. Bryce puffed out his chest, looking incredibly smug. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice in protest. I simply reached over and pressed the power button on the projector. The machine hummed to life. I connected my tablet wirelessly. Having anticipated this exact brand of incompetence 30 days prior, I had legally backed up every single piece of correspondence to my personal cloud drive. A massive email chain suddenly illuminated the giant screen right behind Julian's head. "Actually, Julian," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the murmurs, "if you direct your attention to the screen, you will see an email I sent directly to you and Bryce exactly 32 days ago. In it, I explicitly outlined that your new software lacked the basic security architecture to handle complex legal archives. I warned you in bold text that a forced migration would result in catastrophic data loss. I also attached the upcoming federal deadlines for your review." I let the silence hang in the air as the investors squinted to read the massive text projected on the wall. And right below my warning, "Julian," is your immediate reply. Quote, "Do not worry about things above your pay grade. Cora, just process the invoices." End quote. The silence in the room became thick and suffocating. The smugness melted off Bryce's face instantly. The investors turned their icy glares from me to Julian. He stood there, his mouth slightly open, his face turning a brilliant, violent shade of crimson. He had just been exposed as a reckless, arrogant liar in front of the very people who controlled his paycheck. It was the most humiliating moment of his entire privileged life. But Julian's ego was too massive to accept defeat gracefully. Instead of apologizing or asking for my help to recover the physical copies, he decided to double down. In his blind rage, he plotted to punish me. He made a snap decision right then and there to assert his ultimate dominance. It was a decision that would become the absolute worst, most legally devastating mistake of his entire existence. The morning after the disastrous boardroom confrontation, a thick manila envelope was aggressively slapped onto the center of my desk. It was an official corporate decree. Julian was absolutely desperate to reassert his fragile dominance and punish me for exposing his negligence in front of the investors. He had spent the entire night drafting a formal, legally binding addendum to the project charter. He explicitly and ruthlessly removed my name from every single operational, advisory, and compliance role associated with the Orion Heights, at the absolute bottom of the page. His signature was scrawled with violent force right next to a newly added clause. That clause officially named Bryce as the sole legally responsible party for all state, federal, and municipal interactions. Julian thought he was banishing me to the corporate basement. He genuinely believed he was cutting me out of the glory and leaving me to rot in administration. I stared at the officially stamped document, gently tracing the fresh blue ink with my fingertip, and I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud. There is a very specific, incredibly tedious piece of legislation surrounding massive, state-funded municipal developments. When a private corporation requests public tax dollars to subsidize their infrastructure, the government requires a highly specialized, individual guarantor to ensure the money is not mismanaged. For Aethirus Property Group to actually receive the $50 million state infrastructure grant, the master project charter had to be physically signed, managed, and constantly updated by a registered senior approval specialist. It is an excruciatingly grueling certification to acquire. It requires 3 full years of audited field experience, 200 hours of advanced legal coursework, rigorous federal background checks, and an exhausting independent board exam. Years ago, when we first applied for the massive grant, the former executive team asked who wanted to volunteer for the program. Naturally, the senior executives did not want to do the actual studying or take on the personal liability, so I took the courses, I passed the board exam, I held the license. What Julian, in his blind aristocratic rage, fundamentally failed to realize was that I was the absolute only individual in the entire company who possessed that specific credential. My personal license was the single, legally binding thread keeping that $50 million lifeline connected to the company. The state laws regulating senior approval specialists are extraordinarily strict regarding personal liability. If you are removed from a project, you have an uncompromising legal obligation to notify the government immediately, or you risk losing your license permanently and facing severe financial penalties yourself. I have always been a very law-abiding citizen. Within exactly 5 minutes of receiving Julian's arrogant decree, I logged into the highly secure, encrypted portal for the state tax board. I meticulously filled out the official severance declaration form. I scanned and attached a high-resolution copy of Julian's mandate, clearly highlighting the section where he officially stripped me of my duties. I typed a polite, thoroughly professional addendum confirming that as of that exact date, I was no longer overseeing the compliance architecture for the development, and therefore could not be held personally or professionally liable for any future infractions committed by the new management. I took a deep breath and hit submit. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation checkmark. With a single click of my mouse, I had just silently severed the financial jugular of Julian's entire operation. The state bureaucracy is remarkably slow to give out money, but it is incredibly fast to freeze it. The invisible death wire had been officially tripped. I certainly did not spend the rest of my week sulking quietly at my desk. I spent it fielding highly lucrative phone calls. The commercial real estate industry in our city is a surprisingly small, interconnected community. Word of the spectacular internal chaos at Aethirus had already begun to leak through vendors and contractors. My reputation as the quiet, relentless force holding the company together had not gone unnoticed by our direct competitors. On Thursday afternoon, I received a highly confidential invitation to lunch from the executive board of Vanguard Estates. They were our absolute fiercest rival, the undisputed titans of the luxury commercial market. They did not want me to sort their mail or manage their filing cabinets. After reviewing my portfolio, They offered me the title of Vice President of Strategy. The base salary they pushed across the polished mahogany table was exactly 3 times what Aetherus was currently paying me, complete with a sprawling corner office, a massive signing bonus, and a dedicated executive support team. I accepted their offer immediately. It was the easiest professional decision of my entire life. I signed their immaculate, heavy bond paper contract with a genuine, bright smile. However, I made one very specific, non-negotiable request. I asked them to set my official start date for the following Tuesday. I needed just a few more days at Aetherus. I needed a front row seat to watch the impending fireworks. Meanwhile, back at the office, Julian was living in a spectacular, manufactured delusion. Rather than addressing the glaring structural holes in the project, investigating why the union representatives were still ignoring his calls, or checking the state grant portal for financial updates, he decided that what the Orion Heights really needed was a massive injection of good public relations. He firmly believed that if he could generate enough flashy media buzz, the nervous investors would simply overlook the catastrophic delays and the monumental budget bleeds. So, he channeled tens of thousands of dollars into organizing a lavish, over-the-top press conference scheduled for the upcoming Monday. He hired a high-end catering company, rented massive cinematic spotlights, and invited local politicians and prominent news anchors for an official ribbon-cutting ceremony to celebrate the groundbreaking phase. He was fully prepared to stand on a beautifully decorated podium and broadcast his unearned victory on live television. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the man was truly breathtaking. He was obsessively polishing the brass railing on a massive ship that was already plunging rapidly to the bottom of the freezing ocean. He had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes was completely hollow, or that the silent countdown to a catastrophic detonation had already begun. Monday morning arrived with blinding, immaculate sunlight. It was the absolute perfect weather for a highly publicized corporate event. Outside the main lobby of Aetherus Property Group, caterers were busily arranging towers of expensive pastries, and technicians were running thick black cables across the pristine pavement to power the massive cinematic spotlights and television cameras. Inside the heavily air-conditioned executive suite on the top floor, Julian was already celebrating his manufactured victory. He was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a brand-new, meticulously tailored charcoal suit. He popped the cork on a bottle of vintage champagne, the crisp sound echoing off the glass walls. He poured 2 crystal flutes, handing one to Bryce, who was sweating nervously in an ill-fitting navy blazer. Julian raised his glass, offering a toast to his own brilliant vision. Utterly convinced that the upcoming media spectacle would erase all the disastrous setbacks of the past month. Down in the administrative bullpen, my computer screen was entirely blank, but I did not need a monitor to know exactly what was happening in the digital ether. State government databases update precisely at 9 o'clock in the morning. When the clock struck 9, the bureaucratic guillotine finally dropped. It started not with an explosion, but with a terrifyingly quiet digital notification. An automated, high-priority alert bypassed the standard company firewall and flooded every single executive inbox simultaneously. It was an official mandate from the state tax board. The subject line was written in bold, unyielding red letters. Emergency, stop work order. The attached document was brutal and legally absolute. It stated that because Aetherus Property Group had failed to maintain a registered senior approval specialist on active duty, the site was officially deemed an unregulated liability. The state demanded that every piece of machinery be shut down immediately. Anyone caught turning a single screw or moving a single pile of dirt would face immediate criminal prosecution. Financial markets are incredibly sensitive organisms, and bad news travels through institutional algorithms faster than the speed of light. The state mandate was publicly filed in the municipal database. Within 14 minutes of the order being issued, the automated risk assessment software at our primary lending bank caught the massive red flag. The bank was not about to let their investment evaporate on an unregulated, legally dead construction site. At exactly 19 minutes past 9, the bank initiated an emergency asset protection protocol. They instantly and mercilessly froze the entire $500 million commercial credit line, keeping Aetherius Property Group alive. The transition from arrogant celebration to absolute, unadulterated panic was instantaneous. The executive floor erupted into total chaos. The crystal champagne flutes were abandoned on the mahogany desk. Multiple phone lines began screaming at once. Angry investors, frantic subcontractors, and furious board members were all demanding answers. Senior partners were sprinting down the hallways, their faces pale with terror. Julian stood frozen in the center of his lavish office, the color rapidly draining from his perfectly manicured face. He stared at the glowing screen of his laptop, reading the catastrophic stop work order over and over again. The realization hit him like a runaway freight train. He looked at the section citing the missing specialist's signature. He remembered the arrogant addendum he had forced through just days prior, the very document where he gleefully stripped me of my duties and pushed Bryce into the line of fire. He had single-handedly unplugged the life support machine of his own empire. Desperation is a powerful, highly toxic narcotic. It makes cornered men do incredibly foolish things. Julian knew that if the board discovered he was the direct cause of a $500 million financial freeze, his career would not just be over, he would be ruined, sued into oblivion, and completely disgraced in the elite circles he desperately worshipped. He needed a fix. He needed to reverse the stop work order before the board called an emergency tribunal. In his blinding panic, Julian completely abandoned any remaining shred of sanity and decided to cross the absolute darkest, most unforgiving legal line imaginable. He grabbed Bryce by the arm, his fingers digging fiercely into the fabric of Bryce's jacket, and dragged him into a windowless, soundproof server room down the hall. Julian slammed the heavy door shut and locked it. He shoved Bryce into a rolling chair in front of an old archival terminal. Julian leaned over him, his breath smelling heavily of expensive champagne and raw fear. "Log into the old compliance database," Julian ordered, his voice trembling with a terrifying, manic edge. "Find an old permit. Find any document Cora signed before we migrated the system. Do it right now, Bryce, or we are both completely dead." Bryce's hands were shaking so violently he could barely type his password. "Julian, we cannot do that. That is a registered state signature. That is a federal credential. If we touch that, it is a massive felony." "Nobody is going to check," Julian hissed, slamming his fist against the metal desk. "The state bureaucrats just want to see a digital stamp so they can unlock the funds. We just copy her digital token, paste it onto the renewal form, and submit it. We tell the board it was a clerical error. We buy ourselves a week to fix the structural mess. Now type." Terrified of his domineering friend and completely lacking a moral compass, Bryce surrendered. He navigated through the dusty digital archives. He located a cached version of my highly secured, encrypted digital signature token from an old soil survey. With sweaty, trembling fingers, Bryce copied the biometric code sequence. He opened the blank state renewal mandate, pasted my forged credentials at the bottom of the page, and clicked submit. Julian let out a massive, shuddering breath, genuinely believing he had just outsmarted the government. He thought he had bought himself the time he desperately needed. What Julian and Bryce fundamentally failed to comprehend was the architecture of modern cybersecurity. When you hold a credential capable of authorizing $50 million in public funds, your digital signature is not just a fancy graphic you can copy and paste. It is a highly monitored, biometrically encrypted federal tracking beacon. Years ago, when I first received the license, I installed an advanced personal security protocol on my credentials to protect myself from exactly this kind of corporate tampering. The exact millisecond Bryce clicked submit, the state portal received the forged document. The system immediately cross-referenced the digital token with the originating Internet Protocol address. It recognized instantly that the signature was deployed from an unauthorized terminal by an unauthorized user, long after the registered specialist had officially severed ties with the company, my personal security software did not just block the submission, it treated the forgery as a hostile, criminal breach of a federal financial system. Silently, without any warning lights or pop-up errors on Bryce's screen, the software compiled the forged document, the timestamp, and the exact network location of the theft. It bypassed the local police department entirely and fired an automated Priority 1 felony alert directly to the Regional Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Ignorance truly is a terrifying kind of bliss, completely unaware that he had just electronically confessed to a major federal crime. Julian stepped away from the terminal. He took a deep breath, smoothing down the lapels of his charcoal suit. He checked his expensive gold watch. It was time for the press conference. The investors were watching. The cameras were waiting. He plastered a brilliant, confident, and entirely fake smile across his face. He unlocked the server room door, walked down the long carpeted hallway, and stepped out onto the brightly lit outdoor stage. Ready to feed a massive lie to the world, completely blind to the heavily armed federal agents already speeding toward his building. The outdoor stage was completely bathed in the glaring light of the television crew's cinematic spotlights. Julian stood behind a clear acrylic podium, looking absolutely radiant in his tailored charcoal suit. He gripped the edges of the stand, leaning into the microphone, delivering a passionate, entirely fabricated monologue about synergy, vision, and the unstoppable future of the Orion Heights. He was performing for the dozens of camera lenses and the millions of viewers tuning in on the local morning news broadcasts. Standing just off to the side of the stage was the chief executive officer of Ethirus Property Group, desperately hoping this expensive media spectacle would somehow distract the shareholders from the massive budget bleed. I stood quietly at the very back of the press tent, arms crossed, waiting for the final act of this glorious tragedy to unfold. Julian had just raised his hand, pointing dramatically toward the empty construction site, preparing to deliver his grand closing statement. He never got the chance to finish his sentence. A fleet of 4 black, heavily tinted sport utility vehicles suddenly jumped the curb and parked aggressively right on the pristine grass of the event space. The doors swung open simultaneously. 6 men and women wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed across the back stepped out. They were flanked by 2 uniformed inspectors from the State Tax Board. They did not pause for the security guards. They did not wait for a commercial break. They walked with absolute, terrifying purpose straight down the center aisle, directly through the sea of reporters. The television cameras instantly swiveled away from the empty construction site and zoomed in on the approaching federal agents. Julian froze, his confident smile completely dissolved, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. The lead federal agent walked straight up the steps, stepped onto the polished stage, and stood directly in front of Julian. The agent did not bother turning off the podium microphone. "Julian Vance," the agent announced, his stern voice echoing through the massive public address system for the entire city to hear. "You are being served with an immediate federal subpoena and are being taken into investigative custody for wire fraud, grand financial manipulation, and the direct forgery of encrypted federal credentials." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of journalists. The camera shutters began clicking frantically, sounding like a swarm of angry locusts. Julian was completely paralyzed. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The chief executive officer of Ethirus, watching his $50 million flagship project turn into a highly publicized crime scene, turned a sickening shade of gray. Panic entirely overtook him, recognizing that the company's stock price was about to plummet to absolute zero. The CEO rushed toward the center of the stage. He grabbed a spare microphone from a stunned reporter. "Ethirus Property Group has absolutely zero tolerance for criminal behavior," the CEO shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Julian Vance and his associate Bryce are terminated from this corporation effectively immediately." The CEO then frantically scanned the crowd, his wild eyes searching the faces of the employees who had been forced to attend the event. He finally spotted me standing calmly in the back. He knew I was the only person who actually understood the complex compliance laws. He knew I was the only one who could possibly untangle this catastrophic mess. "Cora," the CEO pleaded, gesturing wildly for me to come forward, entirely forgetting we were broadcasting live to millions of people. "Please, get up here. Explain to the press that this is an isolated incident. Tell the investors that our compliance department has everything under control. We need you to fix this." I uncrossed my arms. I slowly walked down the center aisle, the cameras tracking my every move. I climbed the short flight of stairs and stepped onto the stage. The federal agents were already placing heavy metal handcuffs on Julian's wrists. He looked at me, his eyes wide, trembling with a mixture of absolute fear and profound regret. I walked right past him. I took the microphone from the shaking hand of the chief executive officer. I looked out at the flashing cameras, and then I turned my head to look directly into Julian's terrified eyes. I let a warm, perfectly calm smile spread across my face. "I would love to help the company navigate this crisis," I said, my voice crystal clear and projecting flawlessly over the speakers. "But as Julian previously stated in front of the entire executive board, I really do not have the traits to be management material." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my official, legally binding resignation letter. I placed it gently on the clear acrylic podium, right next to Julian's abandoned notes. I did not say another word. I turned around, walked down the steps, and strode confidently away from the flashing lights and the chaos. I left Julian facing a lengthy prison sentence and a completely destroyed reputation. I left the chief executive officer standing in the ashes of a burning empire. I walked straight out to the street, climbed into the back of the sleek black town car that Vanguard Estates had sent for me, and told the driver to take me to my new corner office. Thank you so incredibly much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of corporate justice and found it entertaining, please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can donate by scanning the quick response code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description and pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our dedicated team members, helps them provide for their families, and ensures we can continue bringing you the absolute best revenge stories on the internet. Have a wonderful day, and remember to always know your worth.